Hello, Culture Matters podcast. I'm so excited for today. Before I introduce you to our guest, here is a quote just for this episode. A good plan, violently executed now, is better than a perfect plan next week. George Patton, our guest today, gets things done. Uh, a tenured career in and around investment, residential development, various holding subsidiaries of much larger organizations. It seems to be leadership, operations, sales, you name it. This person's like a Swiss Army knife. I'm so excited to have them on the dang show. It's been way long overdue. We originally met, I think, in person at a memorable event. I
Yep.
got to know them and their brother.
Yep.
And so our guest today, long awaited Chief Strategy Officer EPM, Chris Gordon. I stole that quote from your LinkedIn. I want to know why, because not a lot of people have quotes. Thanks for coming, by the way. Not a lot of
Yeah.
people.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited. That quote, because specifically in my role, and I guess, you started with the title, Chief Strategy Officer. I feel like there's perception that we need to make things very complicated. And like the word strategy is mysterious. And I think that we can fall into analysis paralysis. And I think that speed becomes more important because if you get to market faster, you can find out what doesn't work or what does work and then fix or exploit from that point forward. So I think it's just getting it into the world. Don't think about it too much because you could spend the next 10 years thinking about something and never get anything off the ground.
Hmm. I think it was Drucker that said part of management is knowing what not to do. Something to that effect. What are your
Yeah.
thoughts on that as it relates to what you're saying, this fix or exploit as you go kind of thing?
So when it comes to management, I think there's a gray area that I have really heavily rely on to navigate me through it is your gut feeling. I think you know what the right or wrong thing to do is almost immediately, but then as soon as you let your brain start running, you get caught in this should I not? What if I did? What if I didn't? What could happen if I do this? And that's not a bad thing. That's you thinking through the different outcomes, thinking through the different possibilities. But it still leads you back to that initial gut reaction. Like go with that because it very rarely leads you wrong. And you can still think through things. You're just going to be doing it on the fly or after the fact.
Were there early lessons on at City? Is that when you were a little kid, were you thinking, I'm going to be working at City? The reason I
That
asked, I just read a book about Jamie Dimon and Sandy Weil and like their storied past together. City,
Yeah.
City. That was, I
Yeah.
think he bought it. Yeah.
Andy Wall, yeah. That was an interesting opportunity. I did not think I was going to go that way directly out of school. Um, we've got a family friend that's I've known for a long time, and I think he's known me since I was a kid. And he was running one of their divisions. Got introduced to him. He told me about a management program they had, and it kind of positions you right under a branch manager. And this was for City Financial, so it was it was non-mortgage loans, and that was I think 2009, 2010, which was eye-opening because you get in and you start learning about these loans, and the system looks like it was built when the first computer came out, and you look at what some of these loans were secured by, and it would be like big screen TV or stereo system. And I got to be put under a guy who really went all in and taught me a lot in I think it was just short of 12 months that I was in that program. And everything from the ground up. So we started on the phones, and then it went to some loss mitigation and managing the team. And it was awesome because I feel like so many people come out of college, they're like, I'm going to go do this. And I didn't know what I wanted to do. So I just jumped in, learned a lot, and through it, got to work with a lot of different people. And that was really in the corporate world the first time that I've been exposed to, all right, how are you going to manage a team with so many different types of players? So, you know, I really think I learned a lot from the management program there. It was called Fast Track. I think a few other people I know have been through it. And that led me to another opportunity at a different company that was had a 2-year management program. And through those programs, I think I went through 17, 18 different businesses. So I got
Whoa.
to learn a lot from the ground level all the way up to being able to have one-on-ones with the executives that ran those businesses. And it really gave me a very broad view of how finance works from beginning to end, from the consumer to the secondary markets, how everything worked. And it was almost a perfect platform to where once I got done, I could really figure out what I wanted to do
Hmm.
because through it, I was able to get my MLO license. Took the classes for my real estate license. I was able to get my Series 7, my Series 63, and really be exposed to so much in consumer finance and mortgage finance that it was a solid launching pad to figure out what you wanted to do going forward.
The seven is what's the seven one?
Been
That's
around.
stocks, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And what's the 63?
63 is your investment advisor, registered investment advisor.
Were those hard?
Um, so they were the 7 had a lot of content.
Like, could I take
63,
that in my spare time?
yeah, definitely could. Definitely possible. For me, it reminds me of how I picked my college major. And I wasn't the biggest
Economics, right?
but yeah, economics. And that was just by chance. I'm not a homework person, or growing up, I was not a homework person, but tests I was fine. So I remember sitting in a counselor's office saying, like, really don't know what I want to do. I like learning, but I like to have my grades be focused on a couple things. Like if there's something that you can think of that is a midterm and a final, and that's what my grade rides on, that's what I want. And that's how we landed on
Wow.
economics because it's everything. There was no grading of homework. It was like you show up for a midterm, you have your final, or it's a paper. And that was kind of right up my alley. And that's how I landed in economics. So how that relates to the 7 is you got to be able to know how to take tests. And that's one thing, whether it was the MLO, the Series 7, Series 63, or anything outside of that, they all ask questions in a very similar way. So once you understand how those questions are being asked, it's much easier to target what content you have to learn.
Hmm. Wow, that's a good tip for test taking. What about would you say that you developed mentorships in that first program at City?
Yeah,
That mentorship that was like, okay, so what would be your advice to our listeners on how to cultivate a work mentor-mentee relationship where they get the most out of that relationship? Because people listening to this right now are probably in it, even if they're not aware of it, in a situation like that.
I think realizing that when you show up, no one expects you to know everything. And getting rid of that feeling about, oh, I don't want to be worried to ask a stupid question. If a person is volunteering to be your mentor, they want you to ask questions because that's where they can bring value. They have the knowledge, they have the experience, and then it puts the emphasis on you to figure out how to get that out of them. And for some, I've had a lot of mentors over the years. Some are some were very open and you didn't have to pry much for information, but as with everything, everybody's got different personalities and you've got to find out what works for that dynamic in your relationship to leverage it as best you can to get everything that you've got. Because really, what you're trying to do is maybe they've got 30 years of experience. You're trying to figure out how can I get as much of their 30 years experience in a much shorter period of time, right?
Mm.
So that you can save time because that's the one thing you can't buy.
What would you say would undermine that mentor-mentee relationship?
Not being authentic, not being trustworthy, trying to leverage it for selfish gain rather than gain of the relationship or the goal.
Hmm. I'm curious about what you learned when it was as it relates to consumer behavior when you were looking at all that data early on for the finance, right? If I understand at
Yeah,
City, a lot of that was like how people, you mentioned TVs and things.
yeah. Because at that point in time, City Financial was managing and recouping a book of business that, at least our loans, were secured by things that were didn't have any value anymore, but they still needed that money, whether it was to help them get to the next paycheck, to help them do a project, to help them with a car. You had to understand what was important to that consumer to be able to fix the problem they had. Many of these loans were delinquent. We had to understand why they were delinquent and build a plan to get them back on the right track.
What do you think's behind people not paying their loans?
Look, I think that let's talk about the great financial crisis, right? I think there were
Because
some
you
people,
started around that time, right? I
yeah,
think.
yeah,
Okay.
not the greatest time to get into the business.
Wow.
But, um, I think there was some strategic defaults, a handful, right? Not the vast majority. I think a lot of it was people not understanding the obligations that they were getting into. And some of it is just unfortunate events of circumstance, right? People losing their job. And you've got to be willing to work through their issues with them because your success is dependent upon them either getting a loan modification that they can pay that you can then refinance, or just figuring out how to refinance them into a loan that's more suitable for them.
Hmm.
And look, there were so many phone calls in the early days where you'd be calling on a loan that was secured by it was a title lien on a car, right? And the response was, "Come get the car. It doesn't even work. It's sitting in my front yard." Like, and that leaves you with, okay, they don't care about the car. That's what secures the loan. How can I come up with a solution that allows them to recommit to this obligation so that
Wow.
we can pay back that loan?
What did that teach you about yourself in that time?
You've got to be vulnerable. You've got to be willing to understand what it's like to be in their shoes. Because if you're calling as the guy who's just there to collect a bill, it's not going to work out so well for you.
Wow. Did you find that people would invest into that obligation? Like,
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
what got them there? What type of thinking?
Empathy. And I
People
think
that are listening to this right now may be in that position. I mean, not that this is a financial crisis, but there's
there's ups and downs in everyone's life.
isn't the consumer debt higher than it's been in many years?
Higher than it's ever been. Yeah. Credit card debt's at an all time high. Interest rates are starting to come down, but that's expensive debt. And I think that just as, if somebody said, yeah, if I was to, let's say, I was talking to a mechanic, a problem that would be very simple for them to fix might be difficult for me to fix. So you've got to show empathy to create the relationship with this borrower because you're the expert. They don't do this every day. They just signed on a piece of paper at the time that they may not have put much thought into. And maybe that, there could be blame on them. There could be blame on the person that originally gave them that loan. And I think that it's our job
Hmm.
to educate them on why this happened, how we're going to fix it, and that you're not a horrible person. We're going to get through this, and you're going to come out better on the other side.
Was it helpful to go down the development residential, like, because you were involved in the investment side, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
yeah, what did you learn? How has that impacted your
yeah.
development?
It's interesting. It was somewhat by chance. We had a charitable organization that built homes for veterans around the country, and when we were building their homes, we were having on the ground issues with some of the contractors we were using. And the solution to that was we had a guy who was my boss for a long time that was very well versed in land development and residential development. And he thought that we could fix some of these problems by bringing some of these functions in house. So, again, got to meet a lot of cool people, have some really great relationships with people who are in, not, I've never been in the military, I don't have many current family members that were, So it was great to learn their experiences and be able to provide them a home that was adaptable for their situations that they could grow their family in.
Why was charity important to that organization?
Because they were paying for the home. These veterans that we built homes for were able to move into a home, most of them catastrophically wounded, so missing an arm and a leg or both. And we were able to build them a home that they could function in and have a family in, because a normal home doesn't work for a person in that situation.
But why did you do it in the first place? Why that? There's so many different types of charities.
That was the company's directive. The company at the time that I was working for was very, from a charitable standpoint, was very focused on helping our veterans.
That's all. Now, did that impact the culture in a positive way?
Absolutely. They had an event once a year. It was a charity golf tournament, and we flew all the vets in. We got to hear some of their stories. We got to connect with them. We got to hear what it was, life was like in their shoes. And then, they would see the company, and the associates would see the end result of how this dramatically could change their life.
How many years did that go on, the charity like that?
It's still going today. They've been doing it since inception, I say early 2000s, in different capacities.
Do you think that our listeners should explore that if they have a business, some type of charitable?
Absolutely. And I don't, for me, I think, especially right now in today's world, I think that giving to the right veteran charity is important, but I'd also encourage them to find out what's important to them and make their decision from there, because I wouldn't advise you trying to get involved in a charity that you don't align with, whether it's their values, their mission, what they're for. I think that if you're going to spend time doing something, make sure it's something that aligns with what you do, with what you like, with what your interests are.
Did it come back?
In
You
what
know,
way?
are you of the belief that it came back? What you put in, you get back as it relates to charity?
100%, 110%. Still talk with many of them on Instagram, and you get to see how their lives have changed.
Hmm, that's powerful. Why do you care? Like, why do you believe in the mortgage industry?
Um,
Or maybe you don't, if you want to
no,
elaborate.
I do believe in it. I think it's a very unique industry. It has very low barriers of entry, with unlimited amounts of success, right? Whether you look at, um, you can start as an LO one day, and that might lead you to have your own lender. There's one test that stops you from doing that is fairly easy to do and pass, right? So I like that, even though it's such a huge market, the mortgage debt market is one of the largest, if not the largest market in the world. Um, and how to get involved is, you don't even have to be licensed. You could be a processor, you could be an account executive, you could be an account manager, an underwriter. Sure, there's tests that you have to go through to refine your skills in those roles, but I mean, you've been involved with the mortgage industry. How many times have you talked to an LO that you then see 5, 10 years down the line that now has one of the biggest mortgage brokers or mortgage banks in the country? That happens over and over again. And
Hmm.
so many times there's no college degree involved, right? This is just a very entrepreneurial industry.
What would you say are the traits of those that are in that position that maybe started out at the bottom? Because yeah, from your experience.
Uh, the two things, and I guess they're more important to me when I'm looking for people to be a part of a team, whether it's me building a team or me joining a team. You want people to be hungry, coachable, and empathetic. They've got to be understanding.
What is the role of the underwriter?
They're the credit decision maker. So they review everything that consumer has coming in and going out. So their income and their debt obligations. And they're the ones determining whether or not they feel that, based on the product guidelines, do they have the ability to repay this obligation? Which
What?
is important. It's
Yeah,
important to
why?
it's important on the front end so that you don't put the consumer in a tough situation, but also, these loans end up as security investments that pay principal and interest to bondholders. And those bondholders, while they do their own diligence and underwriting, there's some accountability of the initial underwriter to make sure what they're ultimately buying that creates liquidity for us to be able to originate new loans is going to pay long term because it's
Let
an
me get
improvement.
that straight. So underwriter impacts consumers so that their debt to income isn't off
Yep,
balance relative to their subjective experience,
yep,
their life, I should just say that.
yep,
And then on the other side of it, in the back end, based on where that promise to pay goes in the stream, like
yep.
Wall Street,
Right.
that then feeds back to how potential other money could be lent out to others that want to achieve the American gift or build their life,
Yep.
buy a house. It's
Yeah.
all connected. It's a flow.
It's a flow. One doesn't exist without the other. And I think that that's what, sometimes in the heat of the moment,
Fascinating.
let's say you're a loan originator, right? You can get caught up saying, I need this to work. I need this to work. But your gut's telling you this isn't the right loan for this consumer. And if you get too many of those, it creates a real liquidity issue, which will bring everything to a screeching halt.
What's the processor?
The processor, so in retail, the processor is the liaison between the loan officer and the borrower getting the package ready for the underwriter. And then once it's through underwriting, they help clear the conditions, get it done for funding.
Uh, and what about you mentioned the account manager? What? How do they relate to this sales underwriter processor?
So, the industry has a few different channels. Just to make it simple, we'll say retail and wholesale. Account managers live on the wholesale side. So they almost act as a processor for the wholesale side of the business. They are the ones working with the account executives, getting the packages ready for underwriting, helping get the conditions back in after underwriting and prepping it for closing.
So okay, if I'm drawing, I drew this incorrectly at first. Like you see these circles, sales, underwriting, processor.
Yep, right
Is
there.
that
Yeah.
correct?
Yep. And they'd show up after the ops circle for closing. So they help up front getting the package built and ready for underwriters. And then once the underwriter's done, they continue with that package, getting it ready for funding.
Oh, so they would be there too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I had it right the first. I'll explain it for the audio. So like three circles that what interlock? They interlock.
Yeah. That's your loan production pipeline. That's
So
how,
sales and if there's two circles, I'm trying to explain it like see how we can explain this for the audio listeners. If there's two circles that are slightly interlocked,
yep.
sales on the bottom, underwriter on the top, the processor is in between them
Yep.
in purgatory.
Yeah. And on the wholesale side, that's the account manager. So very similar roles working with different parties.
And then the third circle, if there's another circle above the underwriter, it'd be processor again.
Processor and then it goes into closing. So the doc drawers, the funders, and then it goes to post closing, and then ultimately goes into the secondary market where the loan's sold.
Do you dream about this?
I dream about how. So I call it the sausage machine, right? It's like a factory. Widgets go through the factory, and most of my time is spent thinking, how do we get that widget through the factory with the least amount of friction possible?
This is like a master class. I love it. Okay. Sales underwriting. What inherent tensions outside of personality, outside of relationship, right? Personality is our innate temperament, uh, combination of genes, environment, whether it can be changed or not. Question mark. Sorry, I got lost in my own thoughts. So outside of personality and temperament, I'm sorry, temperament, And relationship. That's like, oh, I've known somebody a while, like him, don't like him, want to work on this, don't want to work on this. Outside of those two variables, structurally, what are some of the inherent components that could create tension in the sausage machine between sales and underwriting outside of relationship and temperament from a structural standpoint?
From a structural standpoint, the most obvious one is compensation, right? In a sales role, you're typically going to have a much smaller base with much more emphasis on incentive. Because now, I'm not saying that underwriters don't have incentive plans, but the majority of their comp is going to be in their base salary because they are trying to make decisions without emotion.
Can you
They're the
elaborate?
they're the decider of whether that credit gets extended to the borrower or not. Which we know that's important to the borrower, but we also know that's important to
Okay,
our
let
team.
me follow. I want to follow because it's like Munger. Follow the incentives. You'll know the behavior. If too much of the compensation would come from, let's say, some type of outcome incentive, that could lead someone to convince themselves, "Oh, this file looks great."
Yeah, and you're going to have you run the risk of originating bad loans, and then you get high delinquency, and it affects liquidity.
That's like this is like a symphony. So okay, so what's another? Is there any like I'm thinking like the dynamic, right? Of we have these two parties that um it's like an arranged marriage.
Yeah. So
This is
and
fun.
look,
I didn't expect. I thought we were going to talk about Scotland, but we'll get to that. So okay, so the arranged marriage. um, this reminds me of a conversation with Phil Mancuso. We start like here, then we end up over here. It's always fun. So yeah, arranged marriage. Don't really know the person. Personalities may or may not mix, but like uh if we're going to talk about structures that influence the relationship and have an impact on my personality, we're talking about, well, how big is the house that we live in? Do we sleep in different beds? How many rooms do we have? How many kids? If we have 10 kids in one room, it's a different dynamic than having, you know, 20 acres with different houses for the kids. And it just me. So what other than outside of compensation, what are some of the structural if anything else that comes to your mind that could that make it naturally tension between these two partners?
communication, right? The communication between two parties, whether that's the arranged marriage or the sales and underwriting. I think that they've got to be understanding that one doesn't exist without the other, right? If sales is not out there getting the business, underwriters don't have a job to do. If underwriters don't do their job well, sales won't be able to originate loans in the future. And I think that when you look at some of the best underwriters, they're almost like, they're putting together pieces of a puzzle or trying to solve a problem. And their ability to communicate that problem back with a solution that they feel will work for all parties is what makes them great. The underwriter that stamps things yes or no without explanation will be extremely frustrating to work with as a salesperson.
Why?
Because, you know, an underwriter's part of an underwriter's job is knowing the ins and outs of guidelines very well. To be effective in sales, your more emphasis is going to be put on your ability to communicate and manage relationships. Therefore, you are reliant on an underwriter or someone else in the process, maybe it's a processor or an account manager, to help you communicate how we fix the problem at hand, right? The loan might be not suspended. Let's say, the cleanest path is you go in, you get your approval, it's got some conditions. Maybe it goes in and you don't get that initial approval. Rather than saying that this loan's going to get withdrawn, suspended, adverse, whatever it might be, having a conversation with the underwriter or the salesperson reaching out to one another and saying, look, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. This is what my borrower or my loan officer is trying to accomplish with this loan. Then they can talk to each other and say, okay, I understand how you're trying to do this. You might be going about it the wrong way. Here's how I'd suggest putting that package together and bringing it back to me so that we can get to the next step of the process.
Mm.
That conversation is one of the differences between a great organization and a not so great organization. If you just got a robot there stamping approvals or denials, you don't have that. That is where the team part comes into play and ultimately will drive the success of the business.
Where does trust come in?
Trust exists throughout every relationship, whether it's the arranged marriage or the LO and the underwriter, right? They've got to respect one another's roles and have vulnerable conversations with each other to make those deals work.
The cadence of what about yeah, okay. Underwriter, sales, that relationship's becoming more clear to me. How about the processor? Is this what's the relation with the processor in sales and the underwriter? Is this a mistress or is this
No, they're the middleman, you know.
or a nanny? I mean, we're using metaphors and stuff.
I think it allows each position allows people to focus on their strengths. If sales is if let's assume that their strength is building relationships and converting those relationships with products into income, right? The the processor is there saying, look, I'm a salesperson, I have my package, here it is. They give it to the processor. The processor understands what the salesperson is going to do. And we'll use processor and account manager interchangeably just for the sake of wholesale and retail. They need to get that package wrapped in a pretty little present and give it to the underwriter, right? I think about it like it actually reminds me of the development conversation that we're having earlier. If I'm going to a bank to say, I need money to build this project, if I hand them a 100-page PowerPoint deck that looks very sloppy, they're going to dig into that PowerPoint and ask me as many questions as possible because it looks like I'm not putting the right amount of effort in up front to get their attention. The processor is there to create that, let's stick with the PowerPoint analogy, to make that deck look as pretty as possible with information in the right place at the right time. So that when the bank gets it or the underwriter gets it, they're not rifling through trying to find things on page 72 versus page 3.
This is great.
They are there to say, oh, it's like a picture can say 1,000 words. When I receive the package and it looks neat and tidy, automatically as a human, my brain is like, okay, I don't have to go looking for problems. And then when I open it and it shows me, oh, here's the income. It's detailed out. It shows me what they're making W-2, if they own a business, if they have retirement accounts, whatever it is, it's all clean. And I don't have to go searching through the package to find where their income's coming from. It's right there. Then I go to their debts and it's like everything's there and there's explanations if needed why this one went delinquent or why I missed a payment once 22 months ago, right? I don't have to go searching and digging, which allows me to spend less time trying to look for the problem than provide the solution.
What's the hierarchy of sales and the processor? The social hierarchy.
I don't
Who
think,
hires who?
no, they don't hire one another. So they're independent teams that work together.
Hmm. What's the relationship?
So
Outside of personality and relationship, what's
the
the
account the account
dynamic
manager
of?
or the account manager or processor is getting everything that's required together neatly for the underwriter to be able to make their decision. Once the underwriter makes that decision, there's going to be things that are still needed to complete the transaction. They then communicate that to the processor or account manager. The processor or account manager then works with the LO or account executive to fulfill those decisions or requests.
Like the processor is inherently is the
Organized.
processor a neutral party in an
Um,
ideal, like in the sense, like, or is that dependent upon, yeah, I'm curious, what outside of personality, the cult of personality or relationship, the processor structurally as a, if there's a trifecta here, there's the
Yep.
sales, underwriter, processor, we have a triangle, the
Yep.
holy trinity. This is fun. They, what's that? The, yeah, the neutrality, or does it, the standard deviation up or down of underwriting influences me, sales influences me. I'm curious of that dynamic, that the inherent power dynamic.
they're they're almost like the translator between the two parties. So they are there to mitigate chaos at all costs. So sales is going to want, they obviously want the deal done. Underwriting is there to protect not only the
So
borrower.
they're the priest, they're the rabbi, or the pastor.
And
Underwriting is like thou shalt.
yeah,
These are the command. This is the holy book here.
exactly.
No, it
Yeah,
must feel like that sometimes. You're
yeah.
getting yes or no. It's like, wait, I can't steal my neighbor's goat. Why? Why? It's like my neighbor's an asshole.
Yeah,
And based on how that commandment is communicated to me via my pastor, my rabbi, what have you. I don't want to alienate too many different religions here with this
yeah, yeah.
show. Uh bro, I'm going to be bought into that or not. I'm just trying to understand the flow of this hot dog factory. What did you say? Widget,
Yeah,
sausage,
sausage machine. Yeah.
sausage machine. Love it. Yeah, I don't want to be a sauce. I don't want to be a weenie. So I want to understand. So intermediary,
Yep.
uh, taking both parties' inherent uh, biases into effect
Yep.
to do what's best for the consumer organization.
Yeah.
Where does this bring us? I want to draw a picture and see if what do you think about these? Is that if let me just put sales processing under. So like if that's flowing,
Yep.
like it's it could very easily be, at some degree, it's got to be a it,
There's got to be the right amount of balance. Like right now, we are looking to gain efficiencies in cycle times, and one of the things that we're looking at is how packages come into underwriting. Now, if I'm running ops and I'm not thinking about anything else, right? I'm just thinking about how to make my part as efficient as possible. I'm going to ask for everything, in an extreme world, I would put as much requirements up front as possible so that I have everything I need to be able to complete my job. The flip side of that is, from a sales perspective, what's industry norm? What are people expecting? How, if I ask for too much, is the consumer or broker going to get frustrated and just take the deal somewhere else? So it's finding the right balance of yin and yang to say, you know, if I require everything, if my underwriting department is so tight that I'm going to require all of these things up front, that could affect my ability, my salespeople's ability to bring deals into the table. So it's the balance between the two.
what do you think about this picture?
What's to say at the top?
So this is a triangle for our
Yep.
listeners, like a triangle top down. So think of
Yep.
it like it's too top heavy. That the spire we're not. It's not spiraling. Like it's not like you just said, balancing. So you have sales at the bottom. This is the proletariat, Marx would say.
Yep.
Then you have, or like this is a pyramid, right? So like think of slave master.
Yep.
Process in the middle, the
Yep.
processor in the middle, they get all the blame from the slaves class, which is the salespeople, or how they feel. They feel like
Yeah.
slaves, right? And then at the top of the triangle, we have the emperors, or the, the what do you
The
yeah
decision maker. Yeah.
Yeah, the underwriter, which
Yep.
is they resent the sales. The processor gets blamed by the sales, and the sales resents the underwriter. So it's a master slave dichotomy.
I would flip it on its head
Oh, I
and
like
make
this.
it more of a funnel, right? And then
Wait,
the
are we
dis
doing worst case scenario?
no.
That's my worst case scenario.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that would be worst case
Oh,
because
that's what I was trying to. Yeah,
okay,
remember Charlie Munger, invert, always invert.
okay.
Like I'm showing worst case scenario.
Yep. Yep. That
So
makes
can you
sense.
explain to me best case scenario now?
So it'd be flipped on its head to look like a funnel because everything's going to flow from top to bottom. And then how much waste or fallout occurs throughout your funnel. Now, the and I think that's where you start to take into consideration human capital expense, right? The further you go down that funnel, the more expense you're creating through, whether that's through services or labor, you're continually creating more expense. So if you have something fall out closer to the bottom, it's going to be much more expensive than it is if it fell out at the top, right? So
Yes, sir.
the balance that happens is for my organization, what is the best funnel? And that is the dichotomy of the relationships between the three parties, right? Because a lot of people think a funnel should look like, an upside down triangle. But when you start looking at expenses and how much it costs when something falls out down here, it might be better to have a funnel that looks like this, the
Hmm.
T. So if you know that if it's inevitable that things are going to fall out, how do I make them fall out earlier from an expense management standpoint, right?
Oh, well, what relationship? So then I'll add another. So then there's um this is not, but like the if there's okay, so tell me, this is the drawing of the right way.
Yep.
So it's customers at the top, then sales, then processor, then at the tip is the underwriting.
Yeah, I mean, there's
To answer your
positions
question,
that
I would
there's activities that happen after underwriting, but for the purposes of this, I think that makes the most sense.
so the how the sales and the customers relate to one another
Yep. All right.
influences the top of the funnel.
Yep.
Because if what do you think? Yeah, how would you?
I think that sales, you know, people generally hang out with like-minded individuals, right? So let's say I'm a loan officer or an account executive, and my field of expertise is going to be FHA loans, right? Lower down payment, lower credit, higher debt to income than a person who's maybe more conventional or jumbo, right? Where they have more down payment, better credit, better income. That is really going to drive me as a salesperson who I'm talking to. Maybe I spend a lot of time talking to first time home buyers, or maybe I spend a lot of time in a specific demographic of the community that might not have the down payment funds or the income funds available to get into a conventional loan. So it's going to create um, its own audience. And I think audiences are what drives sales. So your audience is your book of business.
Um,
I guess that's what creates expertise, right? It's very rare to find a salesperson who's going to be equally as much of an expert in a jumbo non-QM FHA conventional VA USDA as they would just one of those. So you as a business owner need to think through that, right? Do I have or should I have salespeople that align with those different interests so I can better serve their audience, right? I don't want to be a catch-all. If I feel like I'm starting to be a catch-all, Maybe I need to split these into different work streams. Maybe I need to have salespeople that just focus on FHA or just focus on VA or just focus on non-QM. Then I'll have ops people that do the same. Then I'll have, everything in between. The process is now my technology, my salespeople, my operations people, the processes become much more specific to the audience at the very top of the funnel, which allows me to be more efficient, which lowers my expense and mitigates fallout from happening later in the funnel.
For part one, what would you say? How would we wrap this dissertation in a bow? For you got to come back. I have more questions, more of a rabbit hole to dive into
Yeah.
after I do my homework, finishing this diagram here.
Yeah. I think part one is understanding, we have just identified some of the roles that exist within the production line of mortgage. And the next part that we could talk about would be, how do I define them? Right? There's got to be clear handoff points. Ops can't be trying to do sales jobs, or the underwriters can't be trying to do the processors jobs or account manager jobs. Account management and processing can't be trying to do sales. Sales can't try to be doing underwriting. We've got to create guardrails that communicate to everybody that's involved. This is what you're responsible for. And then we'll ultimately have performance metrics and tracking to see how well each of these individuals do in their area of responsibility. And when they see that happen, that's what creates trust. The trust is what then leads to a predictable system that we can then scale.
That's a great segue because, yes, in the absence of trust, why would I stay in my lane?
You wouldn't, right? That's why you can have underwriters trying to be sales trying to be underwriters, or account managers. And the trust is the lack of trust is what creates the phenomenon of trying to Monday morning quarterback every single thing that happens to you.
In closing, a good plan, violently executed now, is better than a perfect plan next week. George Patton, aka Chris Gordon, thanks for coming on the Culture Matters podcast.
Thanks
I'm
for having me.
excited for next time. Yeah, if you're listening to this episode, tune in for part two, and we will see you next time on the Culture Matters podcast. Thank you, my friend.
Thank you.